Well, I'd like to tell you a story today, but I'd like to tell you the story from the point of view of Jesus, as if he were telling you a story about a biblical character who you've probably heard about in your Sunday school lessons or even from the pulpits on Sunday. So let's get started. You just heard the official record, but I want to tell you what it looked like from where I was sitting. You know, I watched the Father pick leaders for a long time. And I'll be honest, his scouting report doesn't look like anyone else's. And I remember when we were looking at Egypt, the people were crying out. The bricks were heavy. The taskmasters were cruel. It was time. And I looked at the Father and said, so who are we sending? We've got some great angels. I've got a few warriors all ready to go. And he pointed way out into the Midian desert to a guy sitting on a rock, watching a herd of sheep that weren't even his. He was 80 years old, he had a stutter, and he was a fugitive from justice. And I said, Moses? That Moses, the one who's been hiding for 40 years, the one who's basically, retired from life? And the Father, he just smiled and he said, he's perfect. He's finally forgotten how to be a prince. Now I can teach him how to be a shepherd. And I watched the meeting happen. The Father decided to use a bush, but not a cedar of Lebanon, not a palace, not just a scrubby little desert bush was what he decided to use. And I remember asking, is the fire really necessary? He's an old man, Father. You're going to give him a heart attack. But Moses, he was curious. And he walks over, and then the voice starts. Moses, Moses. Well, I watched Moses scramble to get his shoes off. There's nothing quite like watching an 80-year-old man trying to hop on one foot while pulling off a sandal because the ground just turned holy. And then the Father gives him the pitch. I've seen the misery of my people. I'm sending you to Pharaoh. I wish you could have heard the silence. Moses looked like he wanted to jump back into the fire rather than go back to Egypt. The job interview between God and Moses was the longest one in history. Moses said, who am I to go to Pharaoh? And the Father said, I will be with you. Well, what if they ask your name? The Father says, I am who I am. And I love that line. It's a classic. But then Moses went for the medical excuse. Lord, I'm not eloquent. I'm slow of speech. My tongue gets tied in knots. I'm a stutterer. And I remember leaning in and thinking, here we go. He's going to ask for a different candidate. But the Father didn't say, oh, you're right. I forgot about the stutter. He said, who made your mouth, Moses? And I realized then the Father wasn't looking for a great speaker. He was looking for a great listener. He didn't need Moses to have a golden tongue. He needed Moses to have a golden God. Then the Father asked the most important question. What is that in your hand? And Moses, he looked at it. A stick, Lord, just a piece of wood I use to keep the sheep in line. And the Father said, throw it down. And it became a snake. And Moses ran. I mean, he really moved for an old guy. But then he picked it back up, and it was just a stick again. And I looked at the Father and I said, so the plan is to take down the most powerful empire on earth with a shepherd's stick and a guy who can't even finish a sentence. And the Father whispered, watch what happens when a nothing is placed in my hand. And I watched. I watched plagues fall. I watched chains break. I watched the sea open like it had been waiting its whole life for that moment. And just when I thought I had seen everything, we went to the mountain. And I remember the day Moses finally made it back to Egypt. He didn't look like a liberator. He looked like a grandfather who had taken a very wrong turn on his way to the market. He had his brother Aaron with him, the designated speaker, and that same dusty shepherd's staff. Well, I looked at the father and I said, he's actually going to go in there. Have you seen Pharaoh's security detail? They have chariots. They have sorcerers. They have hats that are taller than Moses. And the father just said, Pharaoh has an army, but Moses has a word. Watch the word. And I watched them walk past the guards. I watched the golden doors swing open. And there was Pharaoh sitting there like he owned the sun, the moon, and of course the Nile. And he looked at Moses like he was a bug that needed squashing. I remember when he finally stood before Pharaoh, his knees were knocking, his voice trembling. But when he raised that stick, the Nile turned to blood. The darkness fell and the chains started to break. And I looked at the father and I said, you knew, didn't you? You knew the stutter didn't matter. And he said, the stutter was the best part. It meant everyone knew it was me. Well, don't worry about what you can't do. Show him what's in your hand. Moses gives the message. The Lord, the God of Israel, says, let my people go so that they may hold a festival to me in the wilderness. I'll never forget Pharaoh's laugh. It was cold. Who is the Lord that I should obey him? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go. I leaned over to the father and said, he just said he doesn't know you. Now that feels like a challenge. And the father, he just smiled, that quiet, sovereign smile, and he whispered, he's about to get an introduction. But then it got worse. Pharaoh didn't just say no, he made it harder. No more straw for the bricks. Make them find their own. They're lazy. Well, I watched Moses walk out of that palace, and he was shaking. The people were yelling at him. He looked up at the sky and yelled, Lord, why have you brought trouble on this people? You haven't rescued them at all. And the father told them, go back, show him a sign. So they go back. Now, Pharaoh, he's bored. Show me a miracle, he demands. Well, Aaron throws the staff down. Poof! It's a serpent, a real hissing desert cobra. And I thought, okay, that'll do it. That's a wrap. But then Pharaoh calls his magicians and they throw their staffs down. Poof! More snakes. For a second, the palace floor is just crawling with snakes, and it looked like a stalemate. But then Moses' snake, the god staff, looks at the Egyptian snakes and he eats them, every single one. One snake left standing, Moses picks it up and it's a stick again. Well, I looked at the father and I said, that was a nice touch, very symbolic. And he said, that was just an appetizer. Pharaoh's heart is hard, but my hand is heavy. Next came the water. The Nile was Egypt's god. It was their lifeblood. It was their pride. Moses, he walks down to the bank, taps the water with that stick, and the whole river turns to blood. And I watched the Egyptian gods fall one by one, frogs in the beds, gnats in the air, darkness that you could actually feel. And I remember asking the father, why so many steps? Why not just snatch them out of there in a second? And he said, because I'm not just rescuing a people from a king. I'm rescuing a people from the idea of kings. They need to see that nothing on earth, not even a God king on a throne, is bigger than the great I am. And I want you to see what I saw in that throne room. Moses didn't win because he was a better negotiator. He didn't win because he had a better plan. He won because he kept showing up to the no. Pharaoh said no 10 times. He lied. He moved the goalposts. He made things harder every time Moses tried to do the right thing. You know, sometimes you might be in a season where life keeps saying no. You pray for a breakthrough and the bricks just get heavier. You try to fix a relationship and the other person just gets harder. You stand on a promise and it feels like the magicians are winning. I saw Moses standing in that palace, feeling like a failure every time he walked out. But I saw what he couldn't see. Every no from Pharaoh was just setting the stage for a bigger yes from God. I remember the final night, the lamb, the blood on the doorpost, the moment the doors finally swung open and stayed open. I watched a million slaves walk out of the most powerful city on earth. And they weren't running, they were marching. And in front was an old man with a wooden stick. And I looked at the father and I said, they're free. And he said, now the travel really begins. And the world might say no 1,000 times, but God only has to say yes once. Now this was something different because up to this point, Moses had seen power. But now he was about to receive something far more dangerous, clarity. Moses goes up the mountain alone. Clouds roll in. Thunder starts rumbling. People are down below saying, yeah, I think we're going to stay right here. Smart choice. I leaned over and said, so what's the plan? And the father said, I'm going to give them a way to live. And I said, oh, this should be good. They're not exactly thriving with suggestions. Now understand, this wasn't casual. This wasn't Moses, grab a pen. This was a stone, permanent, uneditable, no revisions, no updated version coming soon. And I remember thinking, this is either going to save them or expose them. So the father begins. Number 1, no other gods. I nodded. Strong start. Number 2, no idols. And I said, good clarification. They're going to try that immediately. Number 3, don't misuse my name. And I said, oh, they're definitely going to struggle with that one. Now Moses is standing there taking all this in, and I'm telling you, he had that look like he wanted to say, could we maybe just keep it to 5? Remember the Sabbath, keep it holy. I leaned in. Rest? You're telling them to rest? And the father said, yes. I said, they're going to turn that into a debate. Then came the relational ones. Honor your father and mother. Do not murder. Do not commit adultery. Do not steal. Do not lie. Do not covet. And by the end of it, Moses is just standing there holding these tablets, looking like a man who just realized these people are going to break all of these before lunch. And here's the part that gets me. Moses is up there 40 days. 40 days. And I looked down at the people and I said, surely they can hold it together for 40 days. The father, he didn't say a word. He just looked at me. You know, that look, because while Moses is receiving the law, the people are down below saying, where did he go? Is he coming back? I don't know. Let's build something shiny. And I said, already? But here's what struck me. Those commandments, they weren't given to control them. They were given to protect them, to show them what life looks like when it's lived close to God. This wasn't restriction. This was rescue, written in stone. And I remember thinking, this is good. This is right. This is life. And I also know that they wouldn't be able to keep it, not fully, not on their own, because the problem was never the law. The problem was the human heart. And I knew one day I would have to step into that gap. Well, sure enough, Moses comes down the mountain, arms full of stone, tablets, face glowing, probably thinking, I can't wait to show them this. I just shook my head and said, Oh, Moses, you might want to brace yourself. Moses, you might want to brace yourself. Because while Moses is coming down the mountain, I'm looking down at camp and something feels, off. There's noise, and it's not the good kind. It's not celebration. It's not freedom. This is different. And I said, What is that? And the father said nothing, just watch. And I see them, all of them, the same people who walked through the sea, the same people who saw the plagues, the same people who just said, everything the Lord has said we will do. And now they're dancing around a cow, not even a real cow, a gold one, a statue. I said, is that new? And then I see Aaron, Moses' brother, the assistant leader, the one who was supposed to help hold things together. And I said, okay, surely he's about to shut this down. No, he's organizing it. He's taking donations. Bring your gold, earrings, bracelets. He's collecting it like it's a building campaign. And then this is my favorite part later. When Moses asked him what happened, Aaron says, well, they gave me the gold and I threw it in the fire and out came this calf. And I said, out came the calf like it just wandered out on its own. They built it, they shaped it, they polished it, and then they stood back and said, this is the God who brought us out of Egypt. And I remember feeling it, that moment when something is so ridiculous it stops being funny. Because this wasn't just bad judgment. This was a complete reversal. They didn't just forget God, they replaced him fast. Because Moses was gone for a little while, and uncertainty crept in, and silence felt uncomfortable. And instead of waiting, they filled the gap. Before we judge them, though, too quickly, we do the same thing. We don't build calves out of gold, but we build them out of, control or success, comfort. How about being right, being liked, even being secure? And when life feels uncertain, we say, I just need something I can see, something I can manage, something that won't disappear on me. Well, now Moses is coming down the mountain, tablets in hand, face glowing. He's had an encounter. He's carrying truth. He's ready. And then he sees it, the dancing, the noise, the calf. And I'll tell you, that was not the homecoming that he imagined. And in that moment, everything collided. God's holiness, human brokenness, truth meeting rebellion. And Moses, the same man who said, I can't speak, suddenly has plenty to say. So Moses comes down the mountain and he sees the dancing, he sees the calf, he takes those tablets, the very words of God, and he throws them down. And they shatter. Not because God's word was broken, but because the relationship was. And I remember standing there watching it unfold, thinking, this is the problem. Not Pharaoh, not Egypt, not the wilderness. The human heart can walk through a miracle and still build an idol the very next day. And that's why this was never going to be fixed with rules only. Because if the answer was just try harder or do better or follow the list, They would have made it, but they didn't. I knew then one day I would have to step into that gap. You see, the law, it was like a mirror. It could show them their face was dirty, but it couldn't wash them. They didn't just need a list of rules to follow, they needed a life to follow. They didn't need the law written on stone, they needed it written on their hearts. And I knew that to do that, I'd eventually have to trade the stone tablets for a wooden cross. You know, I think we all have a stutter, and maybe yours isn't a literal one. Maybe yours sounds more like a voice in your head that says, I'm just a stay-at-home mom. I'm just a guy who messed up his first marriage. I'm just a local pastor in a world of superstars. I'm too old to start over, or I'm too young to be taken seriously. We spend our whole lives trying to fix our stutters before we'll agree to do anything for the Father. But I watched Moses walk toward the most powerful palace on earth with nothing but a dusty wooden stick and a voice that tripped over its own words. He was still shaking. He still had a stutter. But he wasn't Moses the fugitive anymore. He was Moses the sent. Father didn't choose him in spite of the stutter. He chose him because the stutter meant everyone would know it was God doing the heavy lifting. When you stop obsessing over your stutter and start leaning on his I am, you realize that the Red Sea isn't your biggest problem, your hesitation is. The law told you what you couldn't do, but I'm here to show you what grace can do. The world, and maybe even your own brain, is going to give you 1,000 reasons why you're the wrong person for the job. They'll give you 1,000 no's. But I'm telling you, as someone who was there, the Father only has to say yes once. So stop waiting for your stutter to disappear. Just show him what's in your hand and then get moving. We've got some traveling to do. Amen.